talking about the Tigray region. Many years ago, it was a tourist attraction, but it's a far cry from where it is now. What's happened to the Tigray region over the last few years?
Yeah, no, thank you, Hugo, for having me on. I appreciate it. It's been very unfortunate to see what's happened in Tigray over the past few years. As you likely know, and your audience, I hope, knows, Tigray has been engulfed in a war and genocide for the past 2 years. Started on November 4th, kind of under the guise of the U.S. elections, because most of the world was paying attention to that, is when the offensive on Tigray started and really kind of unleashed the genocide that we see today. So, as you mentioned, Tigray was once a tourist attraction, and now it has become a place where 500,000 people have died. Reports are today that that estimate has increased to 600,000, and millions are on the brink of death due to government-imposed starvation and siege.
Now, talk to us about the parties involved in the atrocities that we are seeing. Just put everything into context, certainly for some of our viewers that are not too familiar with what's going on in that region.
Sure. So the parties involved really are the government of Ethiopia, government of Tigray, and several foreign invaders, namely the Eritrean government. So as you know, Tigray is in the northmost region of Ethiopia, and it's sandwiched between Eritrea and the rest of Ethiopia. So what is happening is the government of Ethiopia and its allied forces are attacking Tigray from the south. From the north, it's being attacked by Eritrean troops. So those are the parties involved. In addition to that, it's really about where the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments are getting weapons from. So the parties internationally outside of Eritrea include countries like the UAE, China, Russia, Turkey, who provided drones to the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments to attack Tigray. So namely, it's the Ethiopian government of Tigray, and the Eritrean government.
Well, I suppose the irony to all of this is that President Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because he was able to come up with a peace arrangement with the Eritrean government, or certainly the Eritrean people. Now, these are the same people, allegedly, that are at the cause of all this transpiring at the moment.
That's correct, and I would not use the word allegedly. It's well documented that the Eritrean troops and the Eritrean government, well recorded, well documented, are very active players in this genocide and have committed several atrocities that both the UN, Human Rights Watch, the international community has come to accept. But you're right. The Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for what was then called kind of a peace treaty between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is really a guise for a war pact that Abiy Ahmed and the dictator Isaias in Eritrea signed together for their common enemy, which was Tigray. So Abiy won this peace prize, and quickly soon after began the genocidal campaign against Tigray.
Well, clearly the world is not doing enough, not just in your eyes, but certainly in the eyes of many. Now, you're co-founder of the TigrayAction Committee. Talk to us about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So as you mentioned, Tigray is besieged. It's been under siege for 2 years at different various kind of extremities. Over the past year and a half, it's been the most intense siege. As I mentioned, I think it is between 5.5 million to 6 million people are currently living in famine conditions. The world has not done enough. There's only a trickle of aid that has gone into Tigray over the past couple years, and due to that, hundreds of thousands of people have died already due to lack of medicine, due to lack of food. Our organization, TigrayAction Committee, is really committed to building awareness as to what's happening, getting the international community to try to do more, meeting with our legislators here in the United States, and putting pressure on the international governments to do more, including the State Department here in the United States, the European Union. The other parts of our nonprofit is really about the action piece, TigrayAction Committee. What can we be doing to try to get aid and food in, rather than waiting for these international communities and these NGOs to do it? And granted, it's very, very hard to get any aid in because the Ethiopian government is blocking all routes to Tigray. We've had to go kind of through the black market to try to get aid, anything in that we can. So we've had fundraisers, we've had 5Ks. We've really tried to tell, kind of through a grassroots effort, the international community, our communities, about what's happening in an effort to raise money and try to get money and food aid into the region. So our nonprofit has been able to do some of that. And when Tigray is open and available, we'll be, again, trying to raise money to support the rebuilding process of the area.
Now, you've kind of given us broad strokes in terms of what's actually happening, but give us detail on the anguish or the suffering, particularly where women and children are concerned in areas that are affected or impacted by war.
Yeah. Traditionally in war, women and children are usually the most impacted. They are often the victims of the most gruesome atrocities that happen in war, and this is no different. In Tigray, women and children have experienced some of the most traumatic atrocities, genocidal atrocities that have really been recorded in this 21st century. It has been underreported, but from what has been reported, hundreds of thousands of women have come forward to share their stories of being raped by the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments. Children as young as 2, grandmothers in their 80s and 90s. There's been women who have reported the Eritrean government specifically and their troops coming in and attempting to make them infertile, to sterilize them, to ensure that they can no longer carry any Tigrayan children, in hopes to wipe out the future of Tigray. So very intentional. It's with intent, right? Genocide is a crime with intent. The intent to ensure that those people will no longer be alive and that the future of that ethnicity will no longer be existing. And that is exactly what has happened in Tigray. Children are starving. They are the weakest, right? They don't have the capacity that adults do to sustain without food and water and medicine for long periods of time. So they are often the ones that are dying quickest. So it's been horrific to see. My father is there, my cousins, my siblings' friends. It's terrible to try to understand what is happening to them and to know that the women and children are the most at risk.
Now, we know that certainly from what we've read, that you left the Tigray region, I believe, when you were a year old. How familiar are you with what's actually happening on the ground at the moment? Have you had the opportunity to travel to Tigray in the recent past?
Yeah, in the recent past, yes. I think recent is relative, so it depends on how recent you're talking. It's impossible to get to Tigray in the past 2 years. There's absolutely no way to get in. My parents fled Tigray before I was born, and it was about 30 years ago for the same reasons. There was a very active war, famine happening in Tigray. Tigrayans have had to fight for their future for several generations, and my parents' generations were one of those. So they fled. They went to Sudan. A very similar story is what we saw in 2020 when this war and genocide started. They fled Tigray to Sudan, and that's where I was born. After that, I did go back to Tigray several times, but it's been a while. So relatively, it's been a while since I've been there, but I am familiar with what's going on the ground. Thankfully, I have contacts that are able to have a satellite phone and are able to get messages out, but I have not heard from my family specifically. So I have no idea how my family is doing. But generally, we have an understanding of what's going on because people are able to use the limited resources that they have to try to inform the world. And they rely on us. They call us the voice of the voiceless because they cannot get these stories out. As you know, and in addition to the siege, it's been a blockade of communications to suppress the stories. So the limited information that we get, we are able to share on their behalf, but I am unable to hear from my family specifically.
Now, Hawzien, when you talked about engagement, you talked about engaging many organizations and governments that are in the West. But Tigray is on the African continent, and there's the African Union, and certainly other bodies that represent Africans. What conversations have you had with organizations on the continent that might be in a position to assist? Well, certainly countries within the vicinity of Ethiopia.
Absolutely. You hear African solutions to African problems, right? And it's been very, very disappointing to see the lack of response from other African countries, specifically the AU, who was housed in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Today, or I think it was yesterday, the UNSC, the A3, which I think is Ghana, Gabon, and Kenya, said that they're gonna finally hold discussions on the topic of Tigray, and they're gonna do it on Friday. This came out, I think it was yesterday, so that gives 4 days between now and then. For what reason? Finally, the A3 is speaking up and talking about Tigray. Finally, we're hearing more African voices speak up against this, or, hopefully against this, but we'll see what they say on Friday. But the question is, why is it taking so long? Why has it taken so long? We know now that, we've seen Samantha Powers, Antonio Guterres of the UN talk about what is happening in Tigray right now with Eritrean invasion of Tigray. As spiraling out of control, as Ethiopia is spiraling out of control. I think Samantha Power specifically said the staggering human cost of this conflict should shock the world's conscience. Yet, the A3 is waiting till Friday. What is the purpose of that? From now to Friday, tens of thousands of people will be slaughtered. More will be dead due to starvation. And so to see these African countries wait is very disappointing. The AU should have been doing more for a long time. Obasanjo has allowed Abiy to stall and stall the conversation of peace talks. And as a result, hundreds of thousands of people have died because of that. Africa needs to do more for Africans.